Okay, welcome everyone to the class. For today's class, we'll be discussing clauses and clause structure and types of subordinate clauses. I think we did discuss a little bit about this in the last class, right? If you remember, mainly I think we talked about what a clause is, and also a little bit about the subordinate clauses, right? So just to recap, um, we know that clauses, they are basically um, that which contains a subject and a verb, right? As opposed to a phrase, right? If I'm to give an example, say any sentence is also a clause because every sentence is going to have a subject. Every English sentence, right? Every English sentence is going to have compulsorily a subject and also a verb, right? Um, any sentence you have, like, I have a pet dog, or I bought a new water bottle, or I ate a mango in the evening. Anything, any sentences of this sort is basically a clause, right? What sort of a clause? An independent clause, a clause that does not require anything else to complete its meaning, or rather, it has full meaning by itself. It has a subject, it has a verb, and can stand on its own. So, all the sentences that I mentioned will then be considered as independent clauses. Whereas, look at a phrase. So, for example, a new car, or along the road, or eats a mango, right? These are all examples of phrases. How is it different from a clause? That most of them do not have a verb and a subject. Even the one that I mentioned, which is eats a mango, this is a verb phrase. It has a verb, but what it does not have is a subject. So for something to become a clause, it should have both the subject and verb. These two conditions are mandatory for a segment to classify as, or sorry, to qualify as a clause, right? Now, we looked at examples of independent clauses already, like the ones that I mentioned, right? I ate a mango in the evening, or I bought a new water bottle, um, or anything, any sentences of this fashion. They're what are they called? They're called independent clauses for the reason I just discussed. Now, in addition to these, what we have is also the subordinate clauses. There are various names to this, but the one that we use is mostly subordinate clauses. You might sometimes also see embedded clauses, but then they are the same thing, right? So embedded clauses, dependent clauses, subordinate clauses, they all mean the same thing. We mostly use the term subordinate for our course. And principal clauses, main clauses, independent clauses, these are all the same thing, right? So what is a subordinate clause then? So what is difference between an independent and a dependent or a subordinate clause? That unlike your independent clause, the subordinate clause cannot stand on its own. It has a verb, it can have a subject. So in that sense, it has fulfilled the condition of being a clause. But what it cannot do is stand on its own. And by stand on its own, we mean that it cannot give you a complete meaning like what the independent clauses can. So that is the primary difference between a dependent clause or a subordinate clause and an independent clause. Okay, clear? Now, another part that you need to keep in mind is subordinate clauses. Now that we are going to analyze sentences for subordinate clauses in the sentences that we are going to see today, you need to understand that the subordinate clause can either appear as the subject of the main clause or the independent clause. It can also appear as the object of the main clause, right? Get this point? So you have the main clause, and within that main clause, you have your subordinate clause, right? So while you have the placement in that sense, this subordinate clause can either appear in the subject position of the main clause, or you will see it in the object position of the main clause. Okay, you'll understand it better when we are looking at the examples. But before we begin with it, I thought in terms of placement and positioning, when you're talking about grammatical structures, placement of the segments are very, very important because that is what gives it grammaticality. Hmm? So keep this in mind that your subordinate clauses are segments which can either be seen in the subject position of your main clause, or it can also appear in the object positions of your main clause. And while they occupy whichever position they are at in the sentence, whether subject position or object position, They can function either as adjectives or as adverbs or as nouns. So based on what functions they deliver in the sentence, or what can they be functionally identified in the sentence, we call them either an adjectival subordinate clause or a noun clause or an adverbial subordinate clause. So what we call them, whether we call them adverbial, adjectival, or noun, depends on whether they act as nouns or adjectives or adverbs in that given sentence. Okay. So this is the basic part. Okay. If I have to talk theoretically about these things, then this is all. The theory is done. Now we are going to look at the sentence and see how we can analyze these things in a sentence. Okay. So let's start with this one, the first exercise. It says underline, but you just need to identify them, okay? The first sentence. Everybody knows that he is an able instructor. Which part of this sentence is the subordinate clause?
That he is an able instructor.
Subordinate clause? Read that again. So I'll tell you once you've identified this one more point, which is a basic part to identification as well as understanding subordinate clause. You're right, but you have missed one part in that. Okay. I mean, you're not right, but you're close to being right. There's something that you've missed while you identified it. And what is it? That. Okay. So that is a part of your subordinate clause, right? If you say he is an able instructor as my subordinate clause, then it is wrong, right? Because look at that sentence. If that is the subordinate clause, then it is not. He is an able instructor is a full sentence. It gives you full meaning. It has a subject, it has a verb, and it's also giving you full meaning. But that's not the case, right? What makes it a subordinate clause is the presence of the word that. Now, what is that? That is a subordinating conjunction. When you learned about parts of speech in the previous course that you did in English, you did go through conjunctions, right? So we learned two types of conjunctions. One was your coordinating conjunction. The other one was subordinating conjunction. Remember this? Subordinating conjunction. So this is that subordinating conjunction, one type of subordinating conjunction. There are more than this, but in the subordinate clauses, usually what you see are that, who, when, where, whose, right? These are the kind of subordinating conjunctions that you see in the subordinate clauses. There are more subordinating conjunctions, but in the clauses, these are the ones that you usually see. Okay. All right. And you will see, I mean, all of them are used, but they have different functions. So that we'll get to a little later. But let's first figure out what's your subordinating clause. So do you understand why this is the subordinating clause? That he's an able instructor. This is your subordinating clause. If you just say he is an able instructor, it's wrong. Okay, that is your subordinating conjunction which connects that particular subordinating clause to your main clause. What's your main clause or independent clause?
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows that he is an able instructor. This is your independent clause, right? Because what did we learn about independent clause? That it should have a subject, it should have a verb, and it should also make full sense, right? So the whole of that sentence is your independent clause. Subordinate clause is always found within the independent clause. It's not separate, right? So for that, you will, okay, so even before we get there, you understand the idea of simple sentence, complex sentence, and compound sentence? Yes, no?
Ma'am,
What's,
difference between complex and compound.
sorry?
Difference between complex and compound sentence. Can you please tell?
So that is why I asked you, are there people who don't understand these things? Because that particular point is important for you to then understand clauses. What are compound sentences? There's a difference. The primary difference between these two sentences grammatically is the difference of the conjunctions you use. So in a compound sentence, you use coordinating conjunctions like and, but, so, therefore, etc. Example, I went to the market, or say I went to the college and I went to the market. What kind of a sentence is this? Is it a compound sentence, simple sentence, or complex sentence? This is a compound sentence, right? Because I've used the coordinating conjunction and. Now, why am I saying coordinating? If you look at the individual parts of this sentence, there are two, basically in this sentence, there are two sentences that are put together with the help of the conjunction and, right? And since both the sentences can stand alone, if I take out and, right? I went to the college and I went to the market. So I have two parts here. I went to the college, I went to the market. Two sentences, I've joined them together using the conjunction and, right? Now, both these sentences have equal status. Why? Because they have their verb, they have their subject, and they can stand on their own. They have their own meaning, right? So these kind of sentences that are, two independent clauses that are joined with the help of a coordinating conjunction, which keeps them at the same levels, is referred to as a compound sentence. Now, what happens in a complex sentence? Now, okay, in terms of the number of sentences, you can have as many sentences as you want. I gave you an example where I clubbed two sentences, two independent clauses. You can add more. Okay, the only condition here is that to make it a compound sentence, you will have to keep using only the coordinating conjunction, right? Now, in the case of a complex sentence, if I have a sentence like after the storm, the town looked deserted. Okay. Or the town looked deserted after the storm. What is the independent clause in this sentence? The town looked deserted, right? This part. Of course, the whole of the sentence is one independent clause. And within that, if you do the division, then the town looked deserted is your independent clause. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. What about this after the storm? Is it complete by itself?
No.
No, right? So this after is your subordinating conjunction. This can create a little bit of confusion among people because after is also used as a preposition at some places, right? In this sentence, it is not. It is giving you an indication of the time. Hence, here this phrase is what? This is an adverbial phrase, and this is what makes it a subordinate clause. So it's basically telling you when did the town look deserted? After the storm, right? So after the after the storm is an example of a subordinate clause because it cannot stand on its own. It definitely requires the rest of that sentence, which is the independent clause which we took out, the town looked deserted, to complete its meaning, right? After is a subordinating conjunction, right? So this is one example. And in the example that we saw here on screen, that is your subordinating conjunction. Okay, and a lot more can be used this way. Okay, this is an example. We also call such sentences that clauses, right? The subordinating clause that begins with the word that, the subordinating conjunction that, they're also called that clauses, right? But have you understood how we differentiate between dependent clauses, independent clauses, compound sentence, complex sentence? So the sentence that I just mentioned, after the storm, the town looked deserted, since it has at least one subordinating clause, we call this sentence a complex sentence. So complex sentence is essentially a combination of at least one subordinate clause and an independent clause. Okay, that's what makes it complex structurally. A complex and compound is basically just based on, this is a name given based on the structure of the sentences. Okay. Whether, if there is a combination of dependent and independent clause, you call it a complex sentence. If there's a combination of just independent clauses, then it becomes compound sentence. If no combinations are available, then you call it a simple sentence. Okay. This is how it works. Any questions on that? Clear? Okay, now you look at this sentence. Everybody knows that he is an able instructor. If I'm to analyze this sentence, what's going on here? Does it have a subject? Everybody knows that he's an able instructor. Does this whole sentence have a subject? Yes. Right, and what is that? Everybody, right? Everybody is your subject. Yeah. Does it have a verb? Yes. What is that verb? No.
Knows.
Right? What follows after that is the object. The whole of that part is the object of the verb know. So everybody knows what? Everybody knows that he is an able instructor. So basically, that whole subordinate clause that he is an able instructor is what? It's the object of the verb know in the sentence. This is what I was saying, that you can find your subordinate clause either in the subject part of your sentence, or you can also see that in the object part of your sentence. Get this? Right? We'll see examples where it appears in the subject, but this is an example where your subordinate clause appears in the object part. Is that point
It's a
clear about?
simple sentence, ma'am.
Sorry?
It's a simple sentence.
Is this a simple sentence?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a simple sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a simple sentence. Okay. Okay. So try to understand this part. This analysis is very important for you to choose the subordinate clauses in a sentence. Usually you don't get a question like whether it's an object or subject position, but don't be surprised even if that is asked, because I think the video lectures will make this clear enough to you. So anyway, try to analyze your statements like this. This is also good to look at the sentences in this way, as subject, verb, object, because that helps you to pick out the subordinate clauses easily. Okay, if you're not able to do it otherwise, if you're not able to make that judgment meaning wise, at least structurally you will be able to pick out what the subordinate clause is. Okay. Now, this is only for exam, but we recommend that you understand what these things are and how it is done, because it will help you form good sentences, complex sentences, which will add to the fluency and proficiency that you are trying to achieve, right? Okay. Second sentence. He saw the trouble that wrong companionship can cause. He saw the trouble that wrong companionship can cause. What is your subordinate clause?
That wrong companionship can
That wrong
cause.
companionship can cause, right? Because the rest of the sentence, look at them, they're okay. They can stand on their own. But what cannot do that is that wrong companionship can cause, right? Right now, we are not identifying the type of clauses. We are only looking at what the subordinate clause is. Okay. Now, so in the first sentence, it was that he's an able instructor. Second sentence again, that is that wrong companionship can cause is your subordinate clause. Third one, just thinking about the final round put him in a competitive mood. This is an example of sentences where subordinate clauses can take up the subject position. What is the subordinate clause here? Look at the subject part of the sentence.
Just thinking about the final round.
Yes, correct. Just thinking about the final round. Okay, try to analyze this sentence if you're able to say this. What is the verb in this sentence?
Put.
Put, right? This part. This is your verb. And what is the object? This is a little a different kind of sentence. But okay, for the time being, him, right? We take it like this. But when we go to the next phase, we'll realize that it's a little different from your usual one. But okay, for the time being, we say him. Okay, so you have the verb, you have the object, and what do you have here? This is what this, the whole part of this whole chunk is what your subject is. So just thinking about the final round. This part becomes your subordinate clause. This is a special kind of subordinate clause. We'll discuss about it a little later. Okay. So just thinking about the final round is your subordinate clause in that sentence. Okay. Then, is that understood? Any questions there? Anything that you haven't understood? All good? Okay. Next one. Fourth one. Dressed in street clothes, Simona and friends strolled in the garden. Which part of this is a subordinate clause?
Dressed in street clothes.
Yeah, dressed in street clothes, right? Because look at this. Simona and friends strolled in the garden is what? It's an independent clause. It has a compound subject, which is Simona and friends. It has a verb stroll, right? And it has a prepositional phrase to uh, complete its sense. So it's a full sentence in itself. But dressed in street clothes is the part which is incomplete here. So this is a subordinate clause. Okay. Sixth one. Learning a foreign language is no easy task. Example of a simple sentence again. But a simple sentence which within it has a subordinating clause as the subject of the sentence. You most probably may not get this complicated levels of sentences, but learn to analyze them in case you get a one or two to test if you have understood the concept really well, right? This is a real test of your concept clarity, right? Usually for the sessions, we try and see that if we can put in 2 or 3 things extra so that, it benefits people who want to really get a concept clarity. And it also helps you test if you have understood those concepts really well. If not, what should you do? You need to rewatch those lectures, right? About this one, sixth one, this is a simple sentence, right? There's a subject, there's a verb, and there's an object. But within that sentence, you have a subordinate clause which is in the subject position. I gave you enough clues. I think it's time that you identify what these subordinate clauses. What would be the subordinate clause here? Sixth one.
Learning a foreign language.
Learning a foreign language, right? Learning a foreign language. Learning a foreign language is no easy task. You're finding it this a little difficult because it's a special kind of subordinate clause. It's not similar to the ones that you saw in the first and the second one. It's neither adjectival or adverbial or noun clause. This is something that we refer to as the infinitival subordinate clause, right? Which is why it is creating a little bit of a problem. But then I think based on the analysis that we are doing, it should not be tough for you to at least pick it out, if not identify what sort of subordinate clauses. Is it clear to you or do you have any doubts?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, right? Yeah, it's if you can say okay at this stage, it is fine. Of course, it requires a little bit of practice. Okay. Seventh one. The only problem in work is to relate work to people's needs. You do the subject verb object analysis. It'll be easier for you to do that. The only problem in work is to relate work to people's needs. Now, what's the verb of the sentence?
To relate, ma'am. Is
The main verb of this sentence is to relate. Do we, is that an active verb? This is what we call as an infinitive, right? To relate. That's the base form of a verb. So it is not a main verb. It cannot act as a main verb in the sentence if it is with to. Main verb is, right? The only problem in work is to relate work to people's need. Look at the sentence this way. The only problem in work is what? Right? So doesn't this to relate become a part of the object then? Yeah, because I can ask a question what, right? The only problem in work is what? Get this? So is your main verb. To relate is a infinitive and they don't, even if they're found in a sentence, they do not contribute to the sentence as a verb. They're not used as a actual verb in a sentence. They're infinitives, they have a very different function to do, right? So the only problem in work is to relate work to people's needs. Your main verb here is, or the only verb here is, in fact. Let's not say main and otherwise. Is your only verb here. To relate is an infinitive. It is not counted in a sentence as such. I mean, as a verb. So the only problem in work is to relate work to people's needs. Here the subordinate clause will be is what? Right? So the whole part here, to relate work to people's needs, that whole part becomes your subordinate clause. Okay? And this is also an example of what we call as an infinitival clause. Here it is clearly present in the form of to relate. So it's easy for you to understand. In learning a foreign language, dressed in street clothes, it's a different kind of infinitival phrase. We call them participles. Did you already watch the lecture on participles? It must have been there in week 2 or 3, no? Yes, no. If you're not watching the lectures, please make it a point that, in English too, unlike in English 1, you're going to find more concepts. These are all advanced concepts that are used in speaking and writing. So you will definitely get an introduction to some grammar structures. These are not grammar per se. These are basically structural introduction to you to understand how you construct a sentence. And this is the basis of learning English in any part of the world, right? And advanced English, definitely, they need to have this kind of practice. So if you haven't watched these lectures already, please make it a point that you go read the PPTs at least. I would recommend strongly that you watch all of them very clearly, slowly. And if you have doubts, please bring it back to us so that, we can clarify it to you, right? I'm assuming that most of you might have watched the lectures. If not, please do that, because these things will not make sense to you without it. Okay. So to relate work to people's needs is your subordinate clause here. Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Next one. 8th one is, I believe that a hot, humid summer has benefited the hotel business. I believe that a hot, humid summer has benefited the hotel business. This should be easy for you. Whenever there is a conjunction, subordinating conjunction present explicitly, it is easy for you to pick it out. Which part of that sentence is your subordinate clause?
That a hot
That
humid
hot.
benefited.
Yes, that a hot, humid summer has benefited the hotel business, right? This is your subordinate clause with the conjunction that in the beginning, subordinating conjunction that. 9th one, I listened to what his friend had to say. I listened to what his friend had to say. Now, analyze subject, verb, object. Simple sentence this is. So, analyze it based on subject, verb, object and tell me what's the subordinate clause.
To what his friend had to say.
To what his friend had to say, right? I is your subject, listen is your verb, and I listened to what his friend had to say. To what his friend had to say becomes your subordinate clause, right, in the sentence. This is an example of a simple sentence with one subject, one verb, and the object. So object part of this is what is taking up the subordinate clause. Okay. Next one, 10th one. He gave his parents what they wanted. Oh, sorry.
What they wanted.
He gave his parents what they wanted, right? What they wanted becomes your subordinate clause. In the I think following lectures, if I'm not wrong, you'll also listen to something called the question clauses, which is going to be under this section called embedded clauses. You have something like question clause, if and whether clause, that clause. These are all under the heading embedded clauses. Now, what is embedded clauses? I've already told you it's another name for subordinate clauses. So this one, what they wanted is a type of question clause and a subordinate clause too. So yes, you're right. Answer is what they wanted. That's your subordinate clause. Now, whoever, 11th one, whoever said that does not understand the question. Whoever said that does not understand the question. Is that a part of, okay, tell me.
That doesn't understand the.
This is what I was looking for.
Whoever said that.
Whoever said that. Okay. So here that is what it is not a subordinating conjunction. What is that here? That is what here?
Object.
No. In terms of parts of speech, what is that here? It's not a conjunction. What is it? If it was a conjunction, we could have used it along with the other one, but here it is not that.
Preposition.
No, it's not position.
Pronoun.
Yeah, it's a pronoun, right? It is used as a pronoun here, representing something else. So if it's a pronoun, then you can't use it as a conjunction. So if you look at the sentence carefully, you will see whoever said that does not understand the question. So what is the verb here? That complex, right? Does not understand. The whole of that complex is your verb, right? Or verb phrase, as you can call it. The question is your object, and whoever said that is the subject. And this part is what is your subordinate clause. Okay, whoever said that, this is your subordinate clause. Does not understand is your verb complex, and the question is your object. Got this? So keep in mind, some of the words, especially words that are used as prepositions, conjunctions, these can be used to mean more than one thing in grammar. So, for example, the word after that I told you, it can be used as an adverb and it can be used as a preposition. Similarly, that can be used as a pronoun, it can be used as a determiner, it can also be used as an adverb, right? So, and also a conjunction as a subordinating conjunction. So, these are all functional words, and since they're functional words, they may have more than one functions to perform. What are they used as in a sentence will have to be judged by the reader based on what the sentence tells you or what the context of the sentence is. Okay, so be a little careful about it. Just because you saw that, don't immediately think that, okay, that does not understand the question is my subordinate clause. Read the question carefully. 12th one, drugs that are used in chemotherapy damage a patient's healthy cells as well. Drugs that are used in chemotherapy damage a patient's healthy cells as well. What is
That are
the
used in.
correct? That's correct. Okay, so for people who haven't understood, what is the verb of your sentence? Drugs that are used in chemotherapy damage a patient's healthy cells as well. What is the main verb of your sentence?
Damage.
Damage, right?
Damage.
So damage a patient's healthy cells. So damage is your verb, and the a patient's healthy cells is your object, as well is an adverbial complex, right? So drugs that are used in chemotherapy is your subject. Now within that, drugs won't be a part of the subordinate clause. But that are used in chemotherapy, right? Only the part after the subordinating conjunction is what becomes the subordinate clause, right? So by that logic, you only have that are used in chemotherapy in the subordinate clause position, right? All right. 13th one. The doctors battled a deadly virus fueled by a lackadaisical public. The doctors battled a deadly virus fueled by a lackadaisical public. Which part of this? So what's the main verb of the sentence, what's the subject, what's the object.
Fueled is verb, ma'am.
Fueled by a lackadaisical public, right? That part is your subordinate clause. Because look at this, main verb is what? Battle, right? Subject is doctors. What was battled? A deadly virus. So that part is done. So whatever follows it is your subordinate clause because it clearly lacks a subject in this case. If fueled by a lackadaisical public is your part of the sentence, which is the subordinate clause, because the rest of the sentence is actually an independent clause. The doctors battled a deadly virus. Full sentence, full meaning. Fueled by a lackadaisical public forms your subordinate clause, which is connected to which part of the sentence? The virus, right? Deadly virus, right? So it's a part of that whole complex, but it has a lack of a subject to fulfill its complete meaning. Hence, it becomes a subordinate clause in that given sentence. Okay. Right. 14th one. Scientists found no evidence to suggest that neutrinos have mass. Scientists found no evidence to suggest that neutrinos have mass. Subject, verb, object. Subject of the sentence is
Scientists
scientists, right? Scientists. Verb,
found.
verb.
Evidence.
Yeah, find.
Verb
Find the
found
past
and
form of the.
object.
Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Find, right? Past form of the verb find, found, right? So find is your verb. What's the object? No evidence, right? Scientists found what? No evidence. So this is your independent clause. So obviously now what is your subordinate clause in the sentence?
To suggest
To
that
suggest that neutrinos have mass. To suggest that neutrinos have mass. We already discussed, I gave you an example of this in the previous one of the examples. So whenever you have the to plus verb form, this is what? This is an infinitive form. So if somebody asks you what kind of a subordinate clause this is, you can say this is an infinitival subordinate clause. Okay. All right. 15th one. When a heart attack occurs, the electronic device automatically produces charges of electricity that jolt the heart back into a normal rhythm. Keep in mind, longer sentences may have more than one subordinate clauses. What is the subordinate clause here in this sentence? It's a long sentence, but it's a simple sentence. It's much simpler than all those shorter ones that you have already seen.
the electronic device automatically.
That is your what? Subordinate clause.
When a heart attack occurs, ma'am.
When a heart attack occurs, yes, that is one of the subordinate clause.
And that
There's
jolt
one
heart
more.
back into a normal rhythm.
That jolt the heart back into a normal rhythm, right? Your independent clause is the electronic device automatically produces charges of electricity. This is your independent clause within the whole of that sentence, right? And when a heart attack occurs and that jolt the heart back into a normal rhythm, these are the two subordinate clauses in the sentence. Okay. Is it difficult?
Not difficult after you have explained it appears to be easy, ma'am.
So see, you will have to practice this a little bit. I will have one more class. Definitely, this is not going to be done in one class. Usually, I spend two of the session on clauses, but then keep in mind, just these two may not be enough for you to understand them better. I'll also show you one more exercise. Okay, that will be very easy peasy. But the moment the sentences get longer, and then there are what happens is there are more chances of you having complex subordinate clauses inside this. Okay, so don't worry about this. It's just a matter of time. If you look at these things closely, you will easily be able to, and even out of your sleep, if you are woken up, you'll be able to say which is what. Okay, the last one here. reflecting on the past 3 years, she wondered whether she could have made better decisions. Reflecting on the past 3 years, she wondered whether she could have made better decisions. Tell me, what is your independent clause here? Which part do you think is a full sentence?
She wondered, ma'am,
Ah.
she wondered.
Yeah, she wondered whether she could have made better decisions, right? This one is your independent clause. So obviously the first part, reflecting on the past 3 years, becomes one of the subordinating clause, right? Now let's see if there are others, right? She wondered whether she could have made better decisions. So if I'm going to break that particular sentence into subject, verb, object, what do I get here? She, okay, that is the subject of that particular embedded clause. Wonder is your verb there. And she wondered what? Whether she could have made better decisions. So even that part, that whether clause you see there, that is also a subordinate clause. Okay. So two subordinate clauses here. One is reflecting on the past 3 years. Then within that embedded independent clause, you have another subordinate clause, which is whether she could have made better decisions, right? Occupying the object position of the verb wonder. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, do you want to proceed further, or do you want to do this, do the identification part of the subordinate clause? Not identification, the type of subordinate clauses for the next class. Will it be too heavy for you to continue?
No, ma'am. It's
No?
okay. No,
All
ma'am.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We'll skip this one. I don't think. Do you have appositive clauses for the syllabus? Which are the ones you have? Adjectival, adverbial, and noun mainly, right? Is appositive a part of it?
No, ma'am. I think.
Did you come across any of the lectures? Did you watch the lectures in first place? Tell me that.
Yes,
Ma'am,
ma'am.
Sometimes,
So did you come across anything appositive?
sometimes
No, ma'am.
No. No. Okay, then we skip that part. We don't do that one. Okay, this one is also, let's do one thing. I don't want to get into that other part immediately. So we'll do one thing. We'll do this exercise, right? Combine each of the following pairs of sentences into one sentence by using coordinator. So this is a practice for you in compound sentences. Wherever possible, avoid repetition by omitting words or using pronouns, right? So your task is to combine the sentences into a compound sentence, right? The first one here, guinea worms are born in ponds and open walls. Second sentence is guinea worms are ingested as larvae by tiny water fleas. The conjunction you're supposed to use is and. How will you combine the sentence?
Ma'am, maybe after Wells, it will be and then
Yeah, that's right. And what will be the following sentence?
ingested.
You just replace guinea worms with they, right? That should be a better way to do that. So guinea worms are born in ponds and open walls, and they are ingested as larvae by tiny water fleas, right? That gives you a good compound sentence. Okay. So if the question says, no, wherever possible, avoid repetition by omitting words or using pronouns. I just use they as the pronoun instead of guinea worms. That's all. Okay. Next one. Managers have no right to analyze. They have no right to make decisions. Again, you'll use the conjunction and.
To analyze and make decisions, ma'am. No right to analyze and make decisions.
Analyze and make decisions. Let me check. Omitting words. But if I say managers have no right to analyze and make decisions, this is a simple sentence, no? This doesn't make it a compound sentence. Is it not? To make it a compound sentence, you should have at least two independent clauses. But if we are going to do it the way you said, then we'll only be left with one simple sentence. Yeah. So here, I think you just need to.
And have, ma'am, again, can we say that?
And have no right to. Still, what happens if you're leaving out they? Then you don't have a full sentence, no? In compound sentence, your sentences have to be both independent clauses. That is, both of them should be able to stand on their own. Otherwise, it doesn't become a compound sentence. Right? So in this case, you will have to use both the sentences as it is, right? So you'll have to say managers have no right to analyze and they have no right to make decisions. Okay. That is what will make this a compound sentence. You omit any part from that second one, it's going to lose its status of being an independent clause, and hence this will not be considered a compound sentence by that logic. Understood?
Okay, both the parts should have, remain the meaning of the original two, sentences, right?
Yeah, they will.
Yeah.
There is no. So even in the case of subordinate clause, there's no change in meaning. The only difference between a compound or a complex sentence or an independent and a subordinate clause is that one can stand on its own, one cannot stand on its own. Subordinate will require something else, another independent clause to be added to it so that it can present its entire meaning. But that problem does not arise with independent clauses since they are full by themselves, they are complete by themselves. And in terms of complex and compound, in compound, you will have to compulsorily have at least two independent clauses. Otherwise, we cannot qualify them as compound. And in complex, you will require at least one subordinate clause or a dependent clause, as it's called, right? So here, the earlier example you gave me of and make decisions will run into trouble because although you added the word and, what follows it is not a full sentence. It's not a independent clause. So then you can't call it a compound sentence, right? Even if you take a few more words, like you say, and have no right to make decisions, same problem, that it is not a independent clause, right? You understand independent clause? No, it needs to have a subject, it needs to have a verb, and it also have to have a full meaning on its own without the support of the other part. Okay, got this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, third one. Driving should be a pleasant experience. At the very least, driving should be an uneventful experience. Or, so you have to use or. Or is also a coordinating conjunction. Or, nor, neither, either, but, so, and, all of them are coordinating conjunctions. So there are two ways you can do this, right?
Simply, we will put an or at the end of the first sentence.
End of the sentence and the first sentence, right? End of the first sentence.
Yeah.
So you can, one option is to do driving should be a pleasant experience, or at the very least, driving should be an uneventful experience. Alternatively, if you want, you can remove at the very least because it's anyway a additional phrase, right? So you can also say driving should be a pleasant experience or driving should be an uneventful experience, right? So with or without that phrase, you simply add or after the first sentence to make it a compound sentence. The fourth one, I needed violence in the play. I didn't want the violence to be gratuitous, but.
Ma'am, maybe after play, it will be but and did not, but did not want.
Yeah, correct. So I needed violence in the play, but I didn't want the violence to be gratuitous. Okay. Some people, what they would do is they may not combine both the sentence, but still add but. Like they'll write this as separate sentences. They might write it as I needed a violence in the play full stop, but I didn't want the violence to be gratuitous. That's also right. But if your plan is to convert this into a compound sentence, then you will have to take off that full stop and add but instead there, right? So it will be full two sentences combined using but. Okay. But the other way, as far as writing part is concerned, it is also right to add just but in the front of the second sentence. If your intention is to convert this into a compound sentence, then you will have to place but after play and then combine these two sentences. Okay. Okay, so functions of subordinate clauses we'll not take up today. This we'll do in the next class. Okay, and need to spend some time with it and a little more practice. So more sentences required. Any questions or doubts from the class? Please look at these documents as well as your PPT and the practice questions that you get along with these modules. And if there are particular doubts about identification of subordinate clauses or the types of them, please do write to us. It's a very important part. You get a couple of questions from that area as well for the exam, right? Okay. If there are no questions, then we'll wind up for today. I'll see you in the next class.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. See you again in the next week.